My name is, of course, Couch Coop. We do have to look at it. I feel it's important. Because of my obsessions with Far Cry 5, this game is unignorable. It is a spin-off, spiritual sequel. It's the 11th Far Cry game. It is not numerically named. And obviously, this isn't an official episode of When Ubisoft Were Good, because we're looking at New Dawn. This game was released in 2019 and it's set 17 years after the end of Far Cry 5. Without treading on too much spoiler territory, there is a cataclysmic event at the end of Far Cry 5 and you see the fruition of this through the slightly altered reality we have here. Different coloured plants, mutated animals. I love that angle. We're going to look at why this game didn't succeed or isn't a fan favourite like Far Cry 5 or even 3. I don't think it even did as good as 6. I've also deliberately not included any footage of its horrendous intro, which involves a train carriage and loads of annoying characters. That's all I'll say about it. But going over this zip line, things ramped up. I was thinking, hold on a minute, there's nothing being done wrong yet. You're immediately introduced to some of its quirky angles on the weapons. This wants to be a sort of Fallout, cobbled together society that doesn't really have access to modern weaponry. That soon goes out the window though, because you get hold of some pretty epic guns, to be fair. But this day to day, the music pumping, the graphics going, doesn't look terrible. This did not get a PlayStation 5 official release, by the way. And that will bring you over to the first thing you'll notice. Other than the ridiculously coincidental rebound angle of every one of those saw blades, it's the music in the beginning of the game. There is no familiar tagline theme. There is a lot of stuff getting pounded out of the speakers by the enemy factions, but there's nothing on that main screen that makes you think, I'm playing New Dawn. Every Far Cry game up till this has had a pretty noticeable soundtrack on it. There is some Diane Wood featured tracks. They stand out quite well, but those two have been through some nefarious news stories of late, but that's not Ubisoft's fault. What we can blame on Ubisoft though is this horrendous loot mechanic that they've slung in. Everything is tiered. Now this also goes for the wildlife and enemies. There's 3 tiers for weapons and there's 3 tiers for most of the bigger wildlife, and if you jostle with something out of your tier, it's game over. So it's all about finding damn springs and cogs and taking those to a workbench in order to get some better weaponry. But to be fair, you can find some pretty cool stuff just knocking around on the enemies, which you can put in your equipment slot. There is also, as you just saw there, some absolutely horrendous detection as well. It's all up in the air. Sometimes it's very good, sometimes it's non-existent. And like Far Cry 5, we have these slightly valuable convoys going around, which has got some essence in that, yes, you guessed it, is required for all of the upgrades, including the stuff back at your camp.
If you can lure them into a landmine, that usually does the trick.
Keep an eye out for scouts. They've always got intel on what's happening in Hope County. Whether it's an outpost, buried treasure, or a new ally in our fight.
It is nice to be back in Hope County, to be honest, and there is some returning characters, and also Joseph Seed is not completely out of the picture. So there's some intrigue and more reason to look into the New Dawn lore. Reminder, I have just put together a Watch Dogs 2 video, and the New Dawn as a cult are in that. That's pretty fascinating. That also goes back to some of their heritage and original relics that they worship. I was really surprised at how much New Dawn content is in Watch Dogs 2. But I wanted to touch on the companions thing. That's definitely still a theme. You get given your first human one kind of for free, but there is some cool freakish stuff, including a boar. That's one of the directions that I loved about 6 and 5, is the cool animals you can get devouring the enemies for you. There's a lot of amusement there. kudos for having throaty 4-stroke engines everywhere. I do love the sounds of most of those vehicles. And that brings me over to performance and travelling around in general. Some of you may have seen the Far Cry 5 content. I was pushing my machine to the absolute maximum, and it was causing some issues when I was going at speed past busy populated areas. And despite this game being a little bit newer than 5, it copes surprisingly well with the frame rates and not falling over whenever you get on, in, off or through a vehicle. And I did want to point out this is a high tier bear, but check out the fire clinging to it as it comes through that grenade. The graphics, the engine is looking pretty amazing. It's just everything else in it is where the problem is. Back to that convoy system, there is a surprising amount of variety of stuff that's driving around. There's dudes that have got valuable springs and cogs in their backpacks, which you desperately need to be able to get to tier 2. And you have supply drops coming in from a plane. Now, this is something that is really pushed my patience, was the fact that it didn't give you access to flyers early doors. Again, that's a top tier unlock from the base. So I never got to see this game running in an airborne vehicle, which is what 5 does almost immediately. I am also killing civilians by mistake on a regular basis, and I did want to cover how proactive the companion is within the vehicle passenger seat position and fighting in general. They really do actually genuinely help you for a low level NPC. So you do have in abundance what I call the Far Cry chaos factor. There's always something going on. Things do constantly spawn in when you're trying to do something else, and it's very distracting trying to get to a main mission campaign when you've got all of this happening in the background. But that's part and parcel of the Far Cry experience as far as I'm concerned. And when it comes to that main quest, you do have that classic rescue the NPC figureheads that will be featured on the map, and they will in turn become a specialist for you going forward. So it's kind of an identical system to 5, where you've got the pictures on the map, you've got to stray into unexplored areas and go and sort someone out who's held up at some ranch or some massive pink piece of infrastructure. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they are the bliss flowers on the ground there. Don't quote me on that. And that brings me over to that pink reference. I just kept getting reminded about Rage 2. I kept thinking, god damn, Rage 2 is a good game. I reviewed that on Ultra at 60 frames per second a couple of months ago. I will link. That game kind of owned that colour scheme. So that one, again, I felt a little bit off-putting and obvious as well. Someone somewhere should have put their hand up and said, this is the exact same colour scheme as a game that came out a couple of years ago and was a first-person shooter and offline and single player. I want to talk about the map in general and that idea with the alternate wildlife and foliage. And of course, you've got these northern lights in the sky all the time, which is probably some sort of radioactive dust reaction. The first thing I was thinking about when entering this map was Annihilation, that film from Garland, which sort of toys with this idea in real time as opposed to post-disaster. Now, they could have really ramped up the mutations, I think, and they should have also pushed some infected human beings. It shouldn't have just stopped at pink antlers on deers. I think a scary survival horror first person within that Annihilation canon would be absolutely awesome. I remember the bear in that being a little bit more scary than the ones in this. But I think we can all agree that the one low point of this entire game has got to be the horrendously written and almost identical to the Borderlands 3 influencer pair, and it's the villains. The majority of a Far Cry game hangs off the lunacy of the villain. Unhingedness is quite a difficult thing to write or portray on screen, but 3 managed it. 5 was really good, 4 also, but these two...
Until you showed up, everything was running smoothly, but you've become a fucking problem. Taking from us, throwing everything out of balance.
I think we should just kill him.
No. Hold on. We don't want any martyrs here.
They are not remotely threatening. They don't come out with any funny one-liners. That's the other thing about writing a good psychopath, is the humor needs to have this like crazy angle to it. They have to show some intelligence to a certain extent and some self-awareness to their actions in order to give it gravitas. I think Vass nailed that so well. Again, Joseph Seed and Pagan Min wasn't terrible, but these two give off the persona of Saturday morning TV presenters.
You made us look weak. That ends now! We're gonna take everything that you hold dear.
What, all my cogs and springs? Is that what you're referring to there? Have they not realised that the protagonist doesn't have a backstory? He's kind of a stranger anyway. He doesn't hold anything dear. He's as new to all of this as the player is. So I just don't understand how lazy that could have been. I think they need to put a list together when they produce Far Cry games, and they need to have a hierarchy of important aspects. And villain should be right at the top. Everything else can be carried over. You can make tweaks to the gameplay, improve the engine, add new vehicles, weapons, enemies, animals, all of that, but none of it's going to hold up if your top person or persons is just not frightening. Check out these pair of alert henchmen getting on with their daily tasks, oblivious to me 1 foot away. Here is what I will say about New Dawn though. Up against Far Cry 6, I would much prefer hanging out in this world as opposed to that Caribbean Republic I'm going to go with. It's quite a grounded game, and I much prefer this slightly mutated / supernatural vibe to the apocalyptic world that New Dawn is built in. I actually had loads more fun with the game than I thought I would, and once you get past that train intro and get introduced to the open world and some of your tasks and see some of the cool animals, it isn't a terrible experience. It just does totally feel like tack-on DLC, like a really good, massive additional content to Far Cry 5. And every time I'm in a fight or in a battle, I'm just comparing it to the previous game, because you would be attacked by an aeroplane, there'd be a damn great helicopter coming in. It was all about that airborne experience against the ground level fighting. And this one promises it, but doesn't bring it to you till a lot later. The game doesn't have enough appeal to be able to stand on its own without that added very cool element, and it's something you're really used to with Hope County as a map and some of the returning characters. My advice with this game is 100% have a look at it if you're a fan of 5, 4 and 3 like everybody is, and of course it's sitting over on Extra only on the PlayStation 4, but you do have access to this on Game Pass, which would open up those settings to be put to Ultra, which I managed most of the time on this. I was constantly knocked back at how good looking it was and how fresh those colours felt. When you look at some Far Cry 5 footage, you're like, whoa, yeah, that palette is seriously dulled down. Just check the feels you get when you hear this little piece of music. Don't know, it might just be me. Faith Seed, I swear I can fix her.
The father kept his word.
It is also one of the more fire retardant forests I've ever clapped eyes on in my life. They probably need to export some of the wood that these trees are made from, because it doesn't spread like it does on the previous game. Some people didn't like that, but I thought the whole forest angle would mean that you would just start massive infernos, but it kind of keeps to its own. It does have an area effect. That was one of the things that blew my mind about 4, is how well the fire is done. 3's is pretty good, but yeah, 4 is like tinderbox. But credit to the engine, it still looks pretty damn good. Here's the one thing that stood out for me. Here's the one thing that made me think, yeah, this game is newer than Far Cry 5. And it's the water disturbance animation on that fish going for the bait. That was a beautiful thing. Because of the story on Far Cry 5, there wasn't really much else they could have done with that timeline and those characters. So I commend them for actually putting the effort in to give us more of Hope County and even Joseph Seed and the New Dawn cult. I think this might have been rushed. I think that's probably what the consensus is, that it was slapped together, reskinned, and put out the door as quickly as possible because they had to get on with 6. You might have got super into this and 100%ed it, and I might be barking up the wrong tree entirely because I haven't put enough hours in. Please put something in the comments if you feel I'm wrong on this, and also don't be afraid to actually try this game yourself on one of the services because it's worth seeing. It's pretty spectacular in places. Check out how long this guy takes to get on the turret and shoot me. On a plus note, I picked up Mad Max for £2.45 yesterday, and to say I'm enjoying that is a damned understatement. It looks so good on PC. Remember, 2015 PS4 only. I'm serious, like, check this out. You guys are in for a cracking video on that one. I'm so close to that chrome chassis, you have no idea. Chassis? Chassis. Stay tuned for my classic Far Cry cursed outro, which should bury this video in the algorithm. I was CouchCube. I will, of course, see you down there.
Walk the path.
But you couldn't fucking do that! Fuck out of here, chicken fuck! Run, Forrest! Run! Okay? I'm the one with the fucking dick.